Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Welcome to Magic in the Room. My name is Ben West. For this week's episode, we're playing a webinar that Chris and Luke led at a Tribal Hub regional event in California in March of this year. And this webinar, it's all about connection. And we just think it's relevant to some of the conversation we've been having here on the podcast recently about building community in the workplace. So we are really grateful to Tribal Hub for letting us replay this recording from their conference. And I definitely encourage you to check out their podcast, subscribe to it, and it'll be linked in the show notes. So let's dive into today's episode about connection with Luke and Chris.
Today, we're going to talk about connection and have a couple objectives. One is we just want to build connection within the Tribal Hub community. So if you're hoping to just come and listen, that's fine. But we also are going to be trying to get some action going in the chat box as we go and really building connection and even vulnerable connection through our session today. So we're going to ask some questions, and please, my encouragement to you is participate as much as you can. And our main thesis today is going to be the more that you bring to the table, the more you get to take away from the table as well. So encourage you to do that. And then we're getting kind of greedy. We have a second objective here, just to give you a little bit about the science and the art of connection that you can take back so that you can build connection within your organization as well. We know a lot of people on the session today are leaders, have a lot of influence. And so the more we can outfit you, the better. So we've done welcome and introductions already. We're going to talk about what connection is, why it's important. We're going to talk about a lot of the job of connection is a job of knowing ourselves, knowing what we want out of the connections that we engage in. And then we're going to have some practical takeaways for how do we create connection in any network, but we want to apply that specifically to Tribal Hub, and then have some time to talk through that a little bit. Chris, anything you'd add?
This looks great. Let's jump in.
Awesome. So why connection? Okay, so as people who work with leaders and work with organizations, we have been grappling with this study that came out late last summer. It's a collaboration between folks at Harvard, Rutgers, Northwestern, Northeastern, and these researchers did this study across all 50 states. And one of their main takeaways is this: we do not see evidence of an improvement in the prevalence of depression and other measures of mental health, despite marked improvement in the pandemic in the United States. So if you remember where we were late last summer, hadn't been a Delta surge yet, hadn't been an Omicron surge yet, but these researchers were finding that prevalence of mental health issues had not decreased at the same rate as public health issues. Well, Here we are now about 6 months later, and I think we're seeing similar things.
Yeah, and my question would be, Luke, I think you see just the amount of lifting, the emotional fatigue, the decision fatigue, maybe the will to win has waned a bit in some organizations as we experience that across teams. But as I look at this, I wonder, what is the role of trauma in all of this, and how does that really play out? Because, right now, if we look at an organization in 2022, in March of 22 versus even February of 20, I think about, what percentage of people in that organization had experienced significant trauma in February of 19? And then what percentage is it now? And I can't help but think that in 2019, it was some number less than 100%. And today we're scratching at 100%. So what role does trauma really play in all of this, and how people are feeling and their mental health and elements of depression and things of that nature?
Yeah, so I think what we know about trauma is that there's a delayed response time between experiencing trauma and then being able to psychologically deal with it. I know, Chris, you're familiar with this story, but I had back surgery about a year and a half ago at this point, 2 years ago. And right before that surgery, I was incapacitated. I couldn't really get out of bed for 3 weeks. And that was a traumatic experience. I'm going to say little trauma, right? Didn't lose anyone, wasn't in the midst of a war, whatever. But for me, I just survived, right? That's what I was focusing on. I got to get surgery. I have to do recovery and rehab. Okay, I did that. Now I need to catch up on all the projects around my house. Okay, and now I'm doing work. And then about a year later, I was like, that was a really hard chapter in my life. And it took a while for me to be able to pause enough to reflect on it, to make sense of it, and then be able to integrate that with my experience and move forward. And that's a small story, but I think a lot of the folks on our teams have a similar experience. Death of a loved one, change in how they do their work, all of these major things that, when you're in the midst of surviving, it's really hard to process. So I think 2022, even without another variant, without some other big surge of public health issues, is going to be a year that people are still having, a high bandwidth, or their bandwidth is going to be full of processing. That ring true for you, Chris?
Yeah, and something unique about working specifically in tribal communities is, these things aren't dispersed across a broad spectrum like they are amongst the general population. When we speak to tribal community impact, like the effect of the pandemic, I think it's just more acute, right? Because everything is more localized. And I think that's what shows up in the mapping of this study as well. You see a lot of the tribal areas being hardest hit, and it's the people that, it's the young adults and the parents and the people that are doing a lot of the emotional work are the ones most affected. And I think that's something, like when we're talking about connection, meeting people where they are and understanding the dynamics within our teams, like understanding what they've experienced, because what the empty nester, the 55-year-old empty nester has experienced is very different than the 28-year-old establishing young family person has experienced. So I think there's some pretty neat findings in the geographic portion of this study as well. They think maybe if, by sharing these, we can create some awareness of how this plays out in different communities in different ways.
Yeah. And so, as you were speaking to it, just put a map up here of % of Americans who are experiencing moderate to severe depression symptoms at the time of this study. And then just some takeaways. Young adults are hardest hit. 42% meet the criteria for moderate depression. Parents with children at home are about 10% more likely to experience those. And then those at the bottom of the pay scale. And when I look at those numbers, I see myself in some of those, right? But I see a lot of the folks that work on our teams in Native enterprise. Love that. Moving to Wyoming. That's my takeaway too. I read this. I was like, man, they've got something going on in Wyoming. So, so I think we're talking about why is connection important? And like connection is the antidote, right? Humans have an innate need. It's built into us that we need connection. So anyone who did Psychology 101 their freshman year of college is going to recognize this as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And an interesting thing about this is that when researchers look at this today, they see it less as a pyramid and more as a web of needs. We need all of these things. We need our physiological needs to be met. We need safety. We need love and belonging. We need esteem from others and from ourselves. And we need to be able to grow into living our highest potential. But there is a level of importance that happens. When we talk to leaders who are like, hey, I need better engagement on my team. Should I do like a shout out board in the break room? Usually the answer is yes, but we have to ask a few questions first, like, well, what's the lowest paid person in your organization? And if their basic needs aren't being met physiologically, if they can't pay their gas bill, that shout out board is not going to do much good, right? If we don't have a safe workplace physically, right, then that shout out board is going to do way less good. Now, if we have those base things covered, then yes, people need belonging. And I read belonging as just another word for connection. And so that's why I love events like this one, where people can have true connection with each other, bring their issues, bring their challenges, and support one another.
Yeah. And I would say, there's really nothing in life that we do alone. Like, we were not created by one person. Those of us with families, we did not create our children alone. We do not have high performing teams alone. There's just very few things that we do in life alone. That's why I think we feel senses of solitude or anxiety, depending on where a person's at. But accepting that sense of connection as just accepting that as a core need, and naming that, and say, okay, after I am fed and after I am warm, I am seeking connection and community and the ability to do things together and go somewhere together. And naming that, I think, is a key piece of this. And it gives us permissions as part of the Tribal Hub community to say, okay, we've got a bunch of like-minded, like-experienced people here. Let's discuss our challenges and our opportunities freely. Let's reach out and let's do meaningful work.
Yeah, so the promised time to interact, the first one is here. So we'd love to see in the chat thread here, what does it feel like to belong? What does connection feel like? And if you have trouble answering that question, you can even close your eyes for a minute and think about a time that you felt truly connected with a partner, with a child, with a loved one, or in an organizational setting with a great team. What does connection feel like? And put some of those descriptions of what connection feels like into the chat. Yeah, feelings of a team, togetherness, happiness. I think it's interesting to think through our happiest moments too. For me, I think about my wedding day, think about the day that my kids were born. I think about my youngest is adopted. So I think about when we were in the courthouse, getting that judge decree. Like, those were all, I was not alone at any of those times. So Michelle, I love that observation. Like, those happiness times are also connection times. Safety, Nicole, thank you. Warmth, meaningfulness. Chris, how about you? What comes to mind? What does it feel like to be connected?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Victoria. Like, meaningfulness, it feels purposeful. It, like, that, almost that sense of flow, like completely immersed in the moment, like nothing else is happening outside of where we are. That feels rich, that. So I'm gonna go with Victoria's play here. Feels meaningful.
Yeah. So why is that? We're going to put on our psychologist hats for a minute and say, why does connection feel like that? Oh, one more. Empowerment, having a team who's supporting the same vision. Yeah, man, we're going to get into this in a minute, but this idea that we are better versions of us when we're connected to healthy community. Fulfilling, like living in Wyoming. We're all going to move to Wyoming after today. All right, so the science of connection. It's a core human need, as we've said. We have this need for interpersonal relationships. Examples of connectedness are friendship, intimacy, trust, acceptance. Heard some echoes of that in the chat. Receiving and giving affection and love. And there's a reason for that. For most of the history of humankind, connection has been critical to our survival. In fact, our brains believe that connection is critical. It's vital to our survival. There's been some interesting things that have happened the last 15 or so years. That's about the amount of time that we've been able to do live MRI imaging. Now, before that, they did all sorts of MRI experiments where they would give people scenarios, they would ask them to think about things, and as they hoped someone was thinking about things, they would snapshot what happened in their brain. What's happened the last 15 years or so is we've been able to actually keep the video on record of what's happening in people's brains as we've given them scenarios, delivered news, have them figured out problems, right? And what we found is that human beings react the same way to a loss of connection or social threat as they do to physical threat. Identical parts of the brain light up. So I'm someone who likes to be outside and be in the outdoors. I have come across a bear in the woods very literally on a hike, right? And I know that feeling like in my stomach, in my chest as my heart speeds up. Cognitively, everything sharpens, and I start looking for where's protection? Where can I go if things go wrong? I get hyper aware of what that bear is doing and what's its body language, right? And what the science tells us is that those same things are happening when people feel a threat to their connection. So, oh man, awesome story in the chat. If you're not following along there, you should. So not only do we experience threat in the same way, that second point there, we also experience social pain like rejection, exclusion, just like physical pain. There have been some really interesting studies. Well, they'll take a parent with a young child, usually an infant, and that infant will be crying in the next room. This sounds really cruel, but the exact same parts of the brain light up when that child is crying in the next room, as if the adult, the parent, was feeling physical pain themselves. That empathy connects to that person that they're close to. And so we actually build neural networks the closer we become to people. If you've been with a partner for decades, right? You're actually going to, your brains talk to one another, and you actually reflect and mirror what happens in those strong connections. So we are really wired for connection.
And I think that's that's interesting, Luke. In you have this whole dynamic between extroverts and introverts and how we approach the world. But this idea, like, if we are a leader and we've raised our hand and we said we want to be responsible for the well-being of other people, like, do we not have an onus to kind of default to action on creating connection? Is that our responsibility? Because it seems to be there's a little bit of a leader-follower component to this, where people will wait for connections to come to them, and then there's the people that seek out those connections. So how important is it to just default to action as it relates to creating these networks?
Yeah, and I would put a spin on that and say being connected sounds like we framed this up. So I cue the next slide. No, but I think it's everyone's responsibility, right? So we're connected to community before we're really responsible for ourselves. So a child is a part of a family, generally, before they can take ownership of where they're connected and where they're not connected. But at some point, for us as adults, it's developmentally appropriate to take on this inside job of where we're connected, where we choose to be connected. And I think for leaders, that has multiple dimensions, right? We have to be responsible for ourselves, the connection we create for ourselves, and also, do we believe in connection enough that we take responsibility to do it with the networks that we're involved in, whether it's a professional network like this, or whether it's the teams that we have responsibility for in our workplaces.
Yeah, I think TribalNet, Tribal Hub, the engineering technical side of this, sometimes, it's a profession that can attract more introverted, real achievement-oriented professionals. So how does that play out in this space? And I think there's elements of just tapping that courage to be our true selves. In when we speak to it being an inside job, what I believe, or what you believe, and this is to anyone on here, that what we believe as individuals is what brings the greatest value to the teams, organizations, and communities that we're a part of. And I think it's just about tapping that courage to say, man, I have that safety in this network. I can show up as me. And as leaders, creating those environments that really invite the authentic version of people to show up. and that they're safe in that space to bring who they are, because really connectedness, and this is kind of a key takeaway for me, it's a matter of belief and presence. It is about where you are and who you're with, and what you believe about where you are and what you believe about who you're with. That's exactly what we're going to get back. And cynicism is the murderer of hope. So that, I am going to have a ridiculously difficult time connecting with other people when I am a cynic. So it really calls to me to be caring, provide environments that are safe, and invite people's true self to the conversation, even if it means we don't always agree, but we're always driving value. And I think that's one of the powerful things about Tribal Hub and this conversation and the people in this room is, and we are open to be our true selves, bring our challenges, bring our opportunities, and have these real conversations, ultimately to create meaningful work and meaningful careers.
Preach it. Yeah. So what we want to do next is share a model that we can use, something that we can walk through ourselves to identify what we want from connection and how we engage the different networks that we're a part of in connection. And it has three pieces: connection to ourself, connection to the now, which we really define as the time and space that we're in. So today's virtual conference is a great example of a now, right? How are we connecting to the time and space that we're present in right now? And connecting to a we, to a community, to a collective, to a group. Now, I think it's really tempting to look at this very linearly, where we think, oh, well, the mature thing is that I have to really connect to myself first, and then I'm going to be mindful and connect to the now, and then I can enter into community. But I want to encourage us not to be too linear with this. As I mentioned earlier, a baby's born and it's a part of a we. If it's going to survive, it's part of a we first. And as it gets older, at some point, it needs to take ownership of, is it connected to itself, right? Do they understand who they are uniquely, what they want, what their purpose is? So we're going to walk through each of these layers briefly, share a couple stories. The first is connecting to self. And I love this quote. This is from a Dutch priest named Henry Nouwen. He says, to live a purposeful life, we must first find the courage to enter into the desert of our loneliness and change it by gentle and persistent efforts into a garden of solitude. So this idea, for me, solitude is enjoying your own company. If I'm lonely, there's an emptiness when I'm by myself. If there's solitude, there's a fullness when I'm by myself. So we're truly connected to ourselves when we know ourselves, right? We do this with assessments with clients all the time, and they'll look at it and be like, well, I never really realized I was a 90 on the 1 to 100 scale of introversion, right? So what do I do? How do I manage that, right? Once we know ourselves and we're aware of who we are, we accept it. We're safe with ourselves. We're not critical. We're not judgmental of ourselves. And then we get proactive and we actually grow, nurture, take responsibility for ourselves. That's when we're really connected, when we're taking responsibility. Move to solitude rather than loneliness. And then the last is that we act with a clear purpose. And I have a little bit of a story to illustrate this. I'm going to use myself here, and I hope that's okay. But I spent, just a little bit of my background, I spent what I call my first career. And most folks on our team were calling what we do now our second career, because we were all kind of organizational practitioners first, had teams that we led, organizations that we were a part of. And now we're in this helping other leaders and teams world. But I was in this place where I was in a nonprofit leadership role. We had a very compelling shared purpose, right? Most nonprofits, if you got a bunch of people working for less than their market value, right, they believe in something. We had a very strong shared purpose. I had role clarity. Primarily, the things that I was responsible for was developing leaders within the organization and running leadership development programs, creating strategy for our organization, leading strategic planning for the leadership team I was on, all that good stuff, and developing our culture as an organization so that our culture could be a strategic, part of our strategic approach and a differentiator. That was role clarity for me. My focus, though, was on developing the organization first and myself second. And when I did develop myself, it was mostly for some sort of organizational end. Well, I need to learn this so I can be better at my job. I need to learn this so we can be more successful at our mission. And what happened by accident is over about a decade, I accepted the organization's values as my own. As I was thinking about this, I was like, you know what? I think I have an artifact from this time. And I went in my basement and I found a self-portrait that I did as part of an assignment. And here it is, right? I'm gonna be vulnerable today and connect with this community and share this thing that I did. And when I looked back at it, I was like, oh, this totally captures how connected I was to the community. I was at a residential nonprofit that people came in, did programs, and then left. So you can see this retreat center is very palpable, right? My goal was for people to come in, have something sparked within them, and then exit to do greater things, right? So I knew my role clarity and I knew the place and context that I felt a lot of ownership of. But the person who represents me, this outline, is kind of empty. And so several years ago, I started this journey, and there were some things that happened where I was like, I think I might value some different things in the organization that led me to really have to think through me and connecting to myself first. So I outlined my personal purpose. This changes over time, but my personal purpose, that's different than the mission of the organizations that I was a part of, is that I invite teams and leaders into what's next for them. And then I identified what are my personal values, the things that really drive my behavior, my intrinsic motivation. And it's these things, like I'm driven to do courageous things. I ask harder questions than maybe the organizations that I was a part of were comfortable with. I want to try new things. I want to learn new things. And beauty on here is just a weird quirk about me. I want things that I teach, things that I'm a part of, to have this aesthetic wholeness that make it really easy for people to grasp them. And so once I got this stuff on paper, once I really started to get clarity on it, it allowed me to connect with myself enough that then I could more fully actually walk into any organization and provide value. Chris?
And Luke, I have a question. How does this change gravity to your ideas and the things that you want to accomplish as a leader? And how does it, what was the material change in connecting differently because you'd gone through this process?
Yeah, so I think of it as clarity about what I am provides choice to people. Mm-hmm. So before, when let's say I had a very permeable membrane between what I believed and what an organization believed or a team believed or whoever I was talking to, I would mirror their beliefs more so than I do now. And while being able to mirror and adjust and translate is really valuable, what I wasn't doing well, I was not providing people with choice. I wasn't saying, here's the compelling thing that I believe is true, right? And do you believe that or not? And I'm going to invite you to think differently about that. So I was much less upfront about that. And that means that I provided less value. I mean, to be honest, right? When half of what I'm doing is echoing back what people already think, that's not encouraging people to grow as much as I could.
Awesome.
So just a little story about connecting to ourselves. So next up is this idea of connecting to the now. I love this quote: "The world is full of magical things patiently waiting for our wits to grow sharper." And I think about that with this conference today. We're here, right? How many magical things are waiting here? The other people who are participants. What experiences do they have that if we're so busy replying to email, or we're just kind of half engaged or whatever, that like we miss out on that. What answers to our questions are just going to sit there and not be answered because we don't have clarity about our questions to be able to bring it to the community.
Yeah. And Luke, if I can jump in there, I think
Yeah.
when we talk about the now, I think every situation we go into, it's that idea of there's only potential energy. It's the ball sitting on top of the slide. Who's going to be courageous enough to nudge the ball? Because once that first person takes that courageous action, then you start to get a lot of contribution from a lot of points and just gravity and growth for that community. So I just want to kind of put that mental image in everyone's head of when we think about the now is just potential energy. And if we don't nudge the ball, it never goes anywhere. And if we are emailing and texting and, doing the things in our office, especially in this virtual world, we're missing our opportunity to create like real heat, real friction, real movements.
Yeah. So we connect to this now when we're aware of our present context. So first we have to be aware. What's going on? What am I seeing? What am I hearing? And then how am I experiencing that? Do I feel affinity for what I'm hearing? Does it create questions for me? Am I totally stressed because of, a conversation I had 30 minutes ago, right? So what's my present experience? We connect to the now when we behave in alignment to our why. Why am I here? What's my purpose? Is it to learn? Is it to contribute? Is it to move myself forward in my career? Right? There's a lot of potential purposes that we could hang our hat on, but we are truly present when we're behaving in alignment with those purposes. And then this last one I think is super interesting. We contribute intentionally or we consume intentionally. So we're really present in the now when we know what it is that I want to give right now. Or what is it that I need out of this? What am I really needing to consume, right? And when I'm really present, I have clarity about those things and I'm able to act in that way. All right, and then the last layer, we connect to ourself, to the now, and then we also can connect to a community. And I intentionally chose this quote from a song that's a love song. Whenever I'm alone with you, you make me feel like I'm home again. We were doing a workshop similar to this. And I said, what is belonging? What does connection feel like? And someone said, home. I was just like, yes, that is what it feels like. But this thing about being in love is that it's almost a paradox, right? When we're with someone that we can truly be intimate with, we are both more ourselves than when we're alone, right? Something that's true about ourselves is mirrored, pulled out, and we've created something else. This whole 1 + 1 = 3 thing happens. And so true community both affirms who we are and pulls something else out that's different. So we know we connect to others when we make ourselves vulnerable. And this is where engaging in a network like this, I think really like the rubber meets the road. Am I vulnerable about my needs? Am I opening myself up to hearing expertise from someone else? I give up some level of ownership. If I join even a Facebook group, right? The Facebook group owns the group and my comments to some reason, right? I have to give up some level of ownership. I join my purpose with others, right? So we have shared purpose when we're truly connected with others. We're all going the same place in the same direction. As I said earlier, this paradox of myself is affirmed, plus I have faith that we are better together than when I'm by myself. So back to the chat. I just want to ask the question, like really straightforwardly, like, what do you need from this community? I'd love to just see like this event, this now, today, this community, right? What is it that we need to consume, that we're needing to be nourished by? If for some reason all of our wishes were granted and we got what we needed today, what would that be? So think about it for a minute. If you have trouble coming up with something, you can think like, why did I put this on my calendar and join today? There has to be a reason. So I'd love to see a few of those in the chat box. While people are doing that, Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you need today?
I think the biggest thing is I have, I think hopefully more than one of us do, but I know that I have this bias that I think everyone experiences life the way that I experience life. And like, I have to accept that that's not true. And what I really look for from this community is for other people that I'm connected with to share their experience, to share their challenges, so that I'm better outfitted to address those with the teams and organizations that I'm a part of. If I can really connect to that story, then I'm mentally prepared and maybe less surprised by something I'm going to run into down the road. Or maybe there's things in that story that through reflection, I can apply to some of the challenges that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, I like that. All right. Gonna have to absorb this in the chat from Robert. The profound feeling of realizing that everyone, including strangers passing in the street, has a life as complex as one's own, which they're constantly living despite one's personal lack of awareness of it.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, and that's what we're talking about. Yeah, Tiffany, hard to improve on that one. Yeah, we're better, I think, when we realize that. We're less self-absorbed. We're more open to feedback and improvement in how we're addressing things. I think about teams that I lead. If I don't open myself to the challenges other people are facing, I'm going to be blind to those challenges when they come my way. Okay,
it's that
next
idea,
question.
It's that idea, Luke, that all of us, like as we live each day, we're creating legacy. Really, the only question is whether or not it's intentional. Speaking to this Robert's comment on personal awareness, regardless of whether or not I'm intentional about it, I am creating a legacy today. And it's by really leveraging those beliefs allows us to control our narrative, to write our story, that create the life that we want to have. But that's why it's an inside job. And so much like that inside job continues with the work we do inside this community as well.
Yeah. Okay, next question. What do you want to contribute to this community? So we can really belong to community. Remember, the idea is if we're intentional about what we need from it and also what we can contribute to it. So I'd love to see a couple answers in the chat. What do you want to contribute to this community? It can be today in this event, or it can be longer term, right? Just the more generic community of Tribal Hub connections moving forward.
I think while folks are responding to that, like what they want to contribute, I can speak to maybe our role, right? And what we see as a possible contribution is like really embracing this idea that we, like, every person here is more alike than they are different. And in one way that we all have the same stakeholders. Either we're trying to create higher levels of effectiveness as partners to tribal enterprise, or we're working within this tribal enterprise to be more productive and create additional resource that then grows a thriving community. So our stakeholders amongst this group, I view as really non-negotiable. And I hope that part of our contribution can be to name that, to call that out, and figure out ways that we can do it better.
Yeah, I just want to highlight a couple of things from the chat. So Jessica, thank you so much. This idea of just learning how to connect and some real good reasons why we should connect. And I love this question at the end. It seems like connections and training courses are lacking. I'm not sure if I'm looking in the wrong place or if they don't exist. And man, wouldn't we all be better off if we had the answer to that question, right? We would know, do I need to create this, or am I just looking in the wrong place? So really appreciate the question. Then Tony, sharing your experiences. Thank you so much for your generosity in doing that. Michelle, similar. And oh, look, Tiffany's already going to reach out to Jessica. Yeah. And Faisal, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Apologies if I'm not. One of the great things about this community is we all seem to deal with the same challenges and limitations. I'd love to find out what people are doing to tackle these challenges and share my own experiences. And man, I think we're in the right, also provide comedic relief. Thank you so much. Well, I think we're in the right place to do that, right? Find out what people are doing to tackle those challenges and share our experience.
Yeah. And the thing before we move on right there, just want to give a nod to Mike's comment. Like, there's, how do we get more, especially we talked about our professions, especially in the tech space, engineering space, drawing, just people that tend to spend more time in their head solving the problems. Like getting feedback on the spot may not be our long suit, but like when you get feedback, it's going to be very detailed, right? So how do we take that into consideration, even in programs like this, to say, hey, we've got these questions right here, but we know 70% of our respondents are going to want to think about this for a day or a week and give us like a well thought out, real solutioned answer to this question. So I think it's through practice, right? Like just getting comfortable being uncomfortable. We talk about that a lot. And that kind of starts to inform that courage and inform that, hey, I don't always have to have all the answers to all the questions, but maybe if I just jump in here and nudge the ball a little, we can grow together.
Yeah, awesome. So I think there's something unique about connection in tribal enterprise. And so, Chris, I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit. Tribal enterprise, kind of our thesis is it's an exercise in connection, whether it's because we are tasked with creating meaningful work, oftentimes including meaningful work for tribal members, or if our work itself is an exercise in creating resources for communities to be healthier and more successful. So we didn't say this as part of introductions, but Chris has led several operations, casino general manager for Cherokee Nation here in Oklahoma for, I don't even know how many years, but multiple properties. And Chris won't say this, but I will. He was the go-to problem solver to send to a challenging property to help it contribute to the community and be a meaningful, progressive place to work. And so I'm curious for you, like what role did connection play, and how do you make that a part of day-to-day life?
Yeah. I mean, first was the realization, Luke, that, and really what we pulled out and discovered together is, I think, we grew up in this world that says technicals matter most. Like if you get the technicals right, you make a lot of money in enterprise, but technicals don't make anything sustainable. And the decision made about technical solutions or metrics or achieving metrics, those tend to erode over time, right? So time, I feel like, serves those organizations where the community is strong, and time is a diluter or erodes enterprises where the community is not strong. So in just thinking about, it's this idea that the unpainted shed eventually turns to dust. Like anything that's not maintained just stops providing utility. It becomes less effective. It is less useful to the people around it. And that's where this idea of community comes in. Like if we're stewarding one another and we're stewarding the assets and we're stewarding our partners and we're stewarding our customers, we're stewarding their experiences, we're stewarding their well-being, that is the path to really high levels of profitability for tribal enterprise. I'm not sitting here saying, I'm not going to say anything about other types of enterprise. I'm speaking to tribal enterprise where community matters. We are afforded as leaders the opportunity to care more. And generally speaking, there's more openness to the most meaningful, needed heart of the matter conversations. And when we talk about, I always think about, the name on the sign, and there's a lot of folks here that work for different tribes. And out front, there's a sign that says whose tribal enterprise that is. And I always think it really makes it clear on who it's for. Where do the resources go? Like, they don't get diverted to Wall Street and diluted around and traded. Like, this stays right here in this community. And that simple fact creates a dynamic where we can have completely different conversations and elevate our level of care for everything that happens within that enterprise. And so that's where this whole people first approach, because we are community based, it also is the route to create really successful enterprise.
Yeah. Love it. Well, we have just a couple more minutes, and then we're going to hand it back over to Tracy and Mike. But just want to leave with some practical, how do we create connection? And this is something that's been helpful to us, the connection equation. So the person plus the environment equals connection. We've talked about the person a lot up until now. Are they connected to themselves? Can they connect to this now? Or did they just get a phone call that their child across the country is sick, right? And they might not be able to connect today to right now, right? Do they have only bosses that yell at them when they mess up, right? Everyone brings something into the connection equation that we as leaders have to understand. On the environmental side, how clear is our purpose and culture? How big are our blind spots? How much consistency can we provide? If we can master those things and clarify why we're all there doing what we're doing, if we can minimize our blind spots, right, especially blind spots that exclude people on accident, if we can provide consistency of culture where having questions, failing at a project, whatever it is, are consistently okay things to do, we create psychological safety, right, where people can connect. Remember, people's brains are wired for connection. So yes, while there's trauma, yes, while there's challenges, yes, while the Native American workforce that a lot of us pull from sometimes does bring some baggage and some challenges into a workplace because of what's happened for the last hundreds of years, everyone is also still wired for connection. So if we create psychological safety, people will connect. And just kind of our last thing is this. There is a paradox with connection that I think you've heard us kind of hinting at. One, individuals who clearly know who they are as individuals. They have a clear purpose. They have boundaries. Ironically, they can most easily connect well. And organizations with clarity about behaviorally what's allowed here and what's not. Why do we show up here? Why do we not? If we have clarity around that, it actually makes connection easier. And just like this, organism here on the slide, you know what we call things that come in and don't have clear boundaries and clear cell walls and know their function, right? That's a virus. That's a disease that comes in. So only a cell with good boundaries that knows its role and has a clear purpose can actually help support the purpose of the organization. So we have a few takeaways here that we would encourage you with. Understand why you show up every day. Understand why you show up to Tribal Hub. Embrace the purpose of tribal enterprise. Have faith that we're better when we show up together. Take responsibility for your learning in this event. And also, let's contribute to one another's success. We do have a toolkit that we would love to send out with links, source materials, all of that great stuff. You can email us and we would be happy to send that to you, or Tracy, happy to send you a copy if you want to reach out to Tracy as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. You can find us. We have a podcast, actually. It's on all the podcast things. Find us on any social media thing or at purposeandperformancegroup.com. So thanks so much for the time. It's an honor to be with you today.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratteroo and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.